Got it. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zia, and if this is your first time on my channel, I talk about software engineering stuff, journey, interviews, all that good stuff. And today I'm gonna be talking about a lot of times people ask me what they should think about or be careful of in a coding interview, and in my mind there are several things to it. There could be several things in there, things like edge cases, classes, object-oriented programming, and whatnot, right? So several things. So when you're in a coding interview and you're being asked a question, there could be several things that you want to think about. Now, what's the best way to structure that thought? In my opinion, I think you should spend at least about 5 to 10 minutes just clarifying the question, making sure they understand what's being talked about. And let's get into an example question for today. Okay, so we'll take a sample question on the whiteboard over here, and I will walk you through step by step what's the thought process, how I think about that question, and how I would go about solving it. Okay, all right, let's get into it. Suppose that you're given some instructions. I want you to parse it and give it back to me in an array. Here's what the input would look like. Okay, so let's say you're given 2 to the right, 3 to the left, 5 in both directions. So the prompt here is, given a set of instructions or input, I want you to parse the instructions and return it back to me in an array. Okay? Now, if you notice, that question is quite ambiguous. The way I would think about tackling this problem is, what does it mean? What is the input type? Right? What are you giving me here? That's the first question that kind of comes up, right? First thing, input type. Okay, that's a little bit unclear, right? Are you giving this to me as a string? Are you giving me it as, I don't know, how are you representing this, right? It's not very clear what it is. That's why I want you to kind of clarify. The second thing is, when you return it back to me, when you set that return it back to me, you're saying return it in a list or in an array, right? What an array of what, right? What do you really want to do with this array? So that's the second thing, right? Return. So assuming that you're turning this into a game, okay, where you can only move right, left, and then both directions. So now that will kind of simplify things a little bit more. So now you can make the assumption that this is going to be for a game, okay? And these are going to be integers. Okay, cool, pretty simple. And this is given to you as a string. Okay, all right. So now you've kind of made some simple assumptions about the input type. Okay, first one is done. Now you want to know about the return type. Okay, what is this array? What does it contain? So this is an area where you can really show some of your design skills and how you use object-oriented programming in your interview. Okay, so let's say the interviewer says instructions, right? They give you this set of instructions. Okay, why don't we just do that, right? Return an array of instructions, and you can define this instruction as a separate class. Okay, so I'm going to do this in Python and say class instruction. Okay, so now you call this as an instruction class, and in this instruction class you have two things. One is the number, and the other one is the direction. Now, if you think about this, in order to make the direction much more readable, how would you represent that? Can you think of any types that will allow you to represent direction very naturally in the language of your choice? Now, some people might say, let's represent that as a string. Cool. But then you always, if you want to do this, some sort of comparison later on, where you want to say, hey, how do I move in different directions? You have to do some sort of string matching, right? So it's not really useful in that case. So let's put that on the shelf for now. Let's think about other alternatives. So you can also say represent this as some sort of integer. Okay, so this could be a 0, left could be a 1, and then both directions could be a 2. Okay, great. Now, what's the problem with that? Now, the problem with that is when someone else comes onto the code and then they're trying to understand what you're doing, they won't really understand what it is, right? Because they're only looking at these integers, and these integers are not very meaningful unless you write some sort of documentation for it. Okay, so you have the second approach there, which is getting better, but it's still not great. Now, I personally believe that the best documentation is not the documentation that you write, but it is in your code. What are the different approaches that you can take to solve this problem? Now, if you look at this, it is a string. So the first thing that naturally comes to mind to me is, can you do some sort of regex, right? First approach, do some sort of regex to solve the problem. Or regular expression. Okay, since it's a string, right, you can probably write some sort of regular expression matching in order to get the instructions out. Now, I'm not a huge fan of writing regular expressions because it is quite difficult to get it right the first time without looking at a piece of cheat sheet. Okay, so that's one of them. Let's think about what other different approaches that you can take. For me personally, I like to see candidates taking different approaches, weigh the pros and cons, and then pick one that works. So that's one approach. And what other approaches can we go with? Okay, a second approach that I can think of. Now, this set of instructions could be separated by something. Okay, it could be either a white space or it could be a comma. Okay, this is something that you want to clarify with the interviewer. And let's just assume that those are being separated by white spaces. Okay, cool. So a really natural thing that comes to mind is, what if I split them by white space or a delimiter, whichever that you choose, split it by a delimiter or a white space, and then for each thing that you get here, you will parse it, okay? If it is no longer a number, then you take everything on the left to be a number, turn it into a number, and then everything from that point onwards is going to be your direction. Okay, so let's walk through how that will kind of work. So if in Python you have a dot split function, or you can implement your own dot split function depending on what the requirements are. So I would typically say, hey, assume that you have a function that splits. Okay, you give it a string, and then you give it a delimiter. And this would return you an array or a list, okay, of string. Okay, and then once that's done, it returns a list of strings or words, right? And you want to basically parse each word, and then put it into your instruction class. Okay, split and parse. Okay, cool. So now I think we have kind of two approaches here, and we can kind of weigh the pros and cons and kind of see which one makes better sense. Okay, so for regex, I'm not a huge fan of it because I think I'm not really strong at writing regex, and I'll probably need a cheat sheet to figure it out, right? Complexity of it will be high. Okay, readability of that, okay, is probably not great as well. Now, for split and parse, okay, I like this one. I like split and parse because first, it makes a lot of sense to me. It's easy to understand, okay, easy to understand. And the second thing is it's also easy to implement as well. Okay, So let's go with that approach then. I prefer this one. Let's go with the number 2 approach. Now this could be a homework for you. If you want to do the regex problem, it's fine. You can try that approach as well, and then let me know what is the regex expression that you came up with. All right, let's get into coding. Now, as we mentioned, we wanted to have a class instruction, right? And we also wanted to have a class direction, where you have left equals 0, right 1, both direction equals 2. Now, you can have other directions in the future as well, if you wanted to, and you can just kind of add it to here. Great. So first thing, you want to have your init function. And in your init function, you will have a number and a direction. Okay. And here you would say self.num equals, you want to turn it into an int, and you have a self.direction equals direction, but you need to have a helper function in this case, set direction, because direction will be a string. Okay. Now let's write our helper function here. Set direction, self direction. Now you will do your if statements here. If direction equals left, equals right, then return direction dot right. Else, if direction, equals left, return direction dot left. Else, direction is both direction, return direction dot both. Else, okay. Here's an exception case, right? So here's something that you might want to check with your interviewer. You can either say throw an exception, which is definitely fine as well, or you can maybe return some default type, default direction, like null or something like that, like direction not null. And then let the client who calls instruction handle it on their own. This is up for a discussion with the interviewer, so I definitely, this is definitely an opportunity for you to have a more intelligent and informed discussion with the interviewer. For now, I will just leave it as is, but we can definitely come back to this a little bit later on. Great. Now let's try it out here. Okay, so let's say I equals instruction, and you have a 2, and then let's say you have a direction to the right. And you're going to print I dot direction and see what gets printed out. Okay, oh, sorry. Well, let's comment that out. I dot direction is 1, okay, so that is to the right. Yes, that's correct. So let's do this. 2, okay. 0, great. Okay, so now we've been able to turn a number and the direction into what we expect it to do. Now, instruction should be in a string. And then we want to print I.num and see what that is. 2 and 0. Great. Okay, cool. So we're good with instruction, and this is exactly what we expect it to do. Now we want to write our function now, which is turn into instructions. We're given a string of input, and maybe you're given a delimiter as well to split it based on that delimiter. Okay, so here I would kind of comment it here, return list of instruction, right? List or array, doesn't matter. And delimiter is used to split the string input. And you can probably add a test case here as well. For example, if you say 2 and then a space and then 3, this should return a list, okay, of instruction, to, and right. And another instruction, 3, and direction dot left. Oops. Okay, cool. So now you've established your return type. Return type here
what is the delimiter being used for, and then what your final result should kind of look like. So this should give you some test cases to go with. Now, let's move into writing some code. Okay, so string input. Now you can do some of your basic checks here. If string input equals to empty, or string input is none, then what do you want to do in that case? Okay, in this case, I might say, hey, let's return an empty list. Okay, something like that. And cool. So the next step is, what do you want to do then? Now you want to be able to do something like a split and then parse, right? So let's write the parse function first, because I think that's where the interesting part is. So let's define parse instruction and say input or in. Okay, and what this thing does is you want to have an index that keeps track of where you are, and then once you hit a number, or once you hit something that is not a number, then everything before that index will be turned into a number, and then everything after will be turned into a direction. Okay, so let's do that. So index equals to 0 for character in input, and string input. Okay, and you want to check if your character is digit. If the character is not a digit, then you have basically found the, you want to do break, else you want to do index plus equals 1. And then you want to return instruction and everything before the index, string input before the index, and then everything after, index after, will be turned into your direction. Okay, there we go. Now you have your parse instruction method. Now we can further do something like test it out first to see how it works. So we can do something like return in map function, which basically takes a function and applies it to every element in the array. This is the function that I want to do. I want to use parse instruction. And let's say I don't do my split first. I'm just going to give it a simple instruction for now. So I would say string input. So let's say that I don't want to use the delimiter for now, and I would just use an empty white space to determine if I should split. So I would say string input dot split, and I give it just a white space, and that should split my string input into a list of strings. And then for every element in my list, I will apply this function parse instruction. Okay, cool. I think that looks pretty good. So let's try it out. Okay, so I want to say instructions equals turn into instructions, and I give it something like this. 3 left. Here I'll just give it an empty space for now. It doesn't matter. And then for instruction in instructions, print instruction, instruction dot num plus instruction dot print instruction dot direction. Okay, let's see how that goes. All right, cool. I think that it works, right? Because I have 2 and 1, 3 and 0. So 2, 1. So 1 in this case is my right, and then 3 and 0. Okay, it's the left. Okay, perfect. Now, okay, Great, so now let's fix up my function here, because here I specified that the delimiter would be a white space, and I don't want to use that as a white space. Maybe I want to do something like comma, right? So give it a comma, then this thing should be able to fix it pretty easily. So let's say delimiter. There, great. Now you have it, right? So you have 3 different classes. You have your direction class, you have your instruction, which is setting the things like instructions, the number, and the direction itself. And then you have your main function here, which is turn into instructions that takes in a string, a delimiter, and then turns that into a list or an array of instructions. All right, I hope you enjoy this class, this short tutorial on how I would expect coding interviews to go. And let me know if you enjoyed it, leave a comment, subscribe, and see you in the next video. Bye!